Hi, I'm John Paul and a really warm welcome back to my channel. Today I'm delighted to be talking about the subject of why I love being a therapist. You might have seen previously I've recorded a video on 5 great reasons to become a therapist. I'll put a link to that if you haven't seen it, and this is really a continuation of that. As I say, 5 reasons why I love it. I've now been seeing clients since 2010, so about 15 years, and I would absolutely 100% continue to choose this profession every day since, and in fact I would say it just gets more and more and more. And I want to explain some of those reasons why. Of course, this is entirely personal and my experience of things. I would love to hear what you think. You may be training to be a therapist, you may have started to see clients, you may also be a therapist who's already seen clients. So as I say, would love to hear what you think. I would love to hear the things that you love about being a therapist, about the reason that you choose and continue to choose this profession if you're already seeing clients. If not, what do you imagine it's going to be like? So please do put those comments below the video. If you like the video, if you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would give it a like. Please do share it with anybody you think would also find it helpful. And finally, please do subscribe if you haven't already. Just to say 2 things, of course, as I say, what I'm going to be talking about here is reasons why I love it. Nothing is perfect. There are things, of course, there are challenges with every profession. I have done a video previously, if we're looking at balance, about the challenges. I'm sure I could do another video about the challenges too. The other aspect of this as well, which is really important, I think, is that in order to keep loving something, in order to keep connected to it, there have to be certain things and ways that something is navigated, certain things that underpin it, certain things that contain it, and like I say, certain frame in terms of navigating the way forward, particularly if you're a therapist in private practice. I think burnout for therapists is a very real thing. So I will also do a video subsequently about navigating things and suggestions that I would have for how to keep loving it, and in some ways to increase that over time, to sort of increase that connection to the profession. Okay, so let's start. The first thing that I would say is, from my point of view, and as I say, this just seems to get more and more, is it leads to a very loved life. And a loved life for me is one that's very much a lived one. As far as loved, let's look at it in terms of connection. So I'm just going to run through an example of why I think that happens. If we're saying that connection, that love is about connection to self, connection to others, connection to the environment, I'm just going to talk through an example about how I think being a therapist really does encourage and make much more room for that. And if there is fear and anger around, or also like a tendency to depend on behaviours and substances, that from my point of view, training to be a therapist and being people's therapist has been very much given my psyche, my experience, something to hand over to, and that would be much more this place of connection, subject to maintaining, of course, safety and not having empathy at one's own expense. And those are the kind of things that I will be talking about in the video of how to love and continue to love the career. So just going back to this example, let's contrast it with when I was a solicitor. I've said it in other videos. What I found was that my intellect and my emotional experience were disconnected from each other. I wasn't particularly intellectually interested in what I was doing. Of course, as with all this, I'm sure there are plenty of solicitors who would be interested in a compensation event in a project agreement. It just wasn't for me. So it didn't really engage with me intellectually, and certainly from an emotional point of view, there was very little emotional engagement. So what it sets up, doing a job like that for hours a day, 5 days, perhaps 6 days a week, from my point of view, is a disconnection between those 2 things, the intellect and the emotion experience, and they're certainly not working together. And in fact, if you get those in conflict, so intellect not particularly engaged, a bit bored, sometimes anxious. If I'm looking at life then, my choices, it was a much more defensive life. I do remember when I first started, the first day that I went into a law firm, not a great start in some ways, because the guy that I shared a room with, who was a more senior person, our boss came in with a piece of his work, slammed it down on his desk and said that was SHIT. I can't say the word because YouTube won't be keen on it, and then walked out. it was less that in some ways that was the shocking thing. I mean, I would have carried on despite that being sort of culturally what happened. So again, intellectually somehow driving me forward at the expense of what I felt. But I remember what this guy said was that every email that comes in, every letter that comes in, he feels anxious until he's opened that email or opened that letter. It was letters then, this was years ago, so we did get letters backwards and forwards. He was anxious until he checked everything and made sure there wasn't a problem. And that, for me, is a very defensive life in some ways. And that would have been what I was doing quite a lot of the time, was leading quite a defensive life where I suppose intellectually it was overriding my emotional experience of things. And what I was led by was, I suppose, a fear of getting into trouble if I didn't do the thing that I was supposed to do. So even emotionally, it would have been fear, probably frustration, annoyance, boredom. So that's the emotional experience, gets fired up into the intellect. There goes anxiety, there goes annoyance. The more anxious thoughts we get, the more catastrophizing, back down to the body and the emotion experience, and round and round and round in that kind of vicious circle or vicious cycle, ever decreasing circles in some ways. Contrast that with now. What I'm learning about, what I do, is of interest to me intellectually, and I can absolutely choose to do the things that interest me intellectually. Psychologically, those things have always been interesting, and I can choose now to do that pretty much all the time, whether that's my client work, whether that's continuing professional development. So it's intellectually interesting. Because it's interesting, I feel something. I feel alive when I'm listening to it. It is stimulating. It encourages a sense of aliveness, excitement, joy. And the more I feel those things, even sometimes, sadness, heartbreak, the more that I feel those things, emotion in my body, up that goes to the intellect. And the more they can be more creative, the problem solving that I'm doing creatively, it's much more about something that matters to me and something that appears to me to be much more meaningful. So what I'm saying, and I have said it in other videos, is that the intellect is working with my emotion experience most of the time. And I sort of see it in some ways internally as a figure of 8 between those two parts. And there is this word synergy, which I know is a bit corporate, but using it in this situation, the combination of being interested intellectually in something and emotionally it making you feel alive, the combined intellect and emotion experience is much greater than either of those individually, I think. And as I say, contrast that with being a solicitor. Those two were completely disconnected for me. There was not a combination of the two of them that made for something greater. And that's also very much the case if I look at other people as well, and the part that others play in being a therapist. Again, using an example. So I gave a training once on trauma denial. It is a subject that is interesting to me, why families or in relationships, people seem to ignore or deny the reality of traumatizing and difficult experiences just in order to carry on. So I was talking about that. It's interesting to me intellectually. It's interesting from a professional point of view because clients might be experiencing that. They may have been in environments where that was happening. So intellectually interesting. From an emotional point of view, whatever those emotions are, it's engaging and makes me feel alive. So again, you have that sort of figure of 8 synergy combining those two. Then I go to continuing professional development scenario with it, talking to say 10 or 12 other therapists. Out that goes, the combination of those two from me goes out to them. From their point of view, they're sort of like-minded people in lots of ways. I will come on to a community in a bit. So they will take that information in. Again, intellectually, it's probably more interesting for them. They will probably have some emotional experience of it, whether that's at home or in past relationships, or they will know someone that does, or maybe they know a client that does. So that stimulates something in them and makes them feel alive. And I do remember when I gave that training, somebody saying that if you're looking at trauma, one of the most significant things to think about is, do you go through it alone? And if you were to go through it with somebody else, it is less affecting from a traumatizing point of view to do that. So the combination of what I've been talking about, going out to others, as is the wonderful thing with other human beings, they add something which is interesting, and back that comes to me. And then I sort of internalize this thing that makes sense to me intellectually. So I'm thinking about the client work, that I don't have to fix something, because if somebody has gone through something very difficult or is going through something now, it's not about changing it for them or telling them what to do or giving them advice. The fact that I'm there with them, we are there together, sort of metaphorically taking each other's hand and walking through it, walking side by side through it, that's going to help them. That of itself helps them. So with that knowledge from someone else, I go back into a professional environment with clients with with more of a faith and belief in what I do, feeling safer within the room, because I don't have to necessarily fix anything or say anything. It's being there with somebody in a particular way, but being there. The fact that I feel calmer, more of a belief in therapy, goes out to the client. Of course, the effect, as I say, of sitting with somebody in that way helps to regulate them, helps them to feel more connected with themselves and others. They are appreciative often of the space and that experience. That might be a very different experience to one they've ever had before. So background, that comes to me. And then I will not labour the point and go on too long, but just to say the sort of mix between professional and personal, I might then step out into my personal environment. My workroom, as you may know, the room I see clients in, is 10 steps away from my home. So I come out having felt more meaningful, filled, connected to myself, connected to others, into my home environment. My daughter has been going through something very difficult. We've done all we can to change that, but otherwise there is nothing else that can be done than she go through something which is distressing. Again, with that belief, and the thing that I can see that happens with clients, that to be with someone, to be looking, giving them eye contact, to be able to tolerate everything that they think and everything that they feel, and to be able to tolerate everything that I think and everything that I feel in response, and just being there, making eye contact, facing them, helps somebody. So I hold that in mind with my daughter, and the act of that with her helps her to get more regulated. So she feels more connected to herself, she feels more connected to me, and background, that comes to me. And on and on and on that goes. I've already said, it's not always as simple as that. Actually, knowing what this feels like with clients, with other people, which I do now, and I will come on to that a little bit when I'm talking about community, means that sometimes when this isn't in place, we have to make a choice as to what we do. And that could be to change it, or that could be to not continue with the relationship. But knowing what that feels like, that is much more present in life. This, as I say, synergy between intellect and emotion, synergy between me as a person and the other person in relationship. And that has profoundly, along with a number of different other things, changed the quality of my life across the board in so many different ways. How I see myself, how I see other people, what I do with my body in terms of exercise, diet, the amount of impulsivity that I would have, certainly the amount of fear that I would experience, and therefore the amount of irritation and annoyance in life. It's changed values, all those things. So a much more loved life, once fear and anger get turned down a bit, once the reward stuff, a kind of preoccupation with status, with money, are not as important, because they have this to hand over to, That makes for much more of the life that I wanted to live. Okay, going on to the second point, and that's this one about, I love the fact that with therapy and being a therapist, it's real, deep human connection. When I say real, in lots of situations, it's masks, it's filters, it can be a performance, and there is a place, of course, I believe, in the world isn't there for having those masks. It is not appropriate in every situation to show all of ourselves. Sometimes we do need to filter things. Sometimes it will be a performance in a certain situation because that's what we need to do. But the thing that I love about therapy, and something that's incredibly valuable about it, and I think will only become more valuable, and that's the reason why I've put it at number 2 here, because I think it will only become more valuable with the coming of AI, is that the thing that's valued most often in therapy is that as somebody shows all of themselves in terms of all of what they're thinking, all of what they're feeling, and that all of that is absolutely welcomed and accepted within the therapy room. And I don't think there are that many environments in life where that's going to be the case. Like I said, in most environments, we're bringing forward particular qualities. They are us, of course, so we wouldn't be able to do it, but bringing forward particular qualities in order to get a need met somewhere, or perhaps please somebody else, whatever it might be. But therapy is one of those unique places potentially where that doesn't have to be the case, where we can show of ourselves to another and feel fully accepted by the other person. In many ways, even as a therapist too, of course, it's different to friendships and those kind of relationships, being someone's therapist, but there really is something about being open and honest and congruent and real and knowing who we are, which is very powerful in terms of the relationship. I mean, I was talking to Kevin on the family estrangement video, and I'll put a link to that here. And he said the thing that he's noticed over time, the more he's worked with clients, is the closer he's come in the room to being who he actually is. So not having that sort of public and private split. Of course, there are some things that are different, lots of things that would be quite different about being somebody's therapist than would be if you met them outside as a friend. But honesty, like radical honesty, congruence, authenticity, those things absolutely are valued from the therapist as well. So I love the realness, the fact that people don't need to pretend. Like I said, people don't need to filter themselves. Of course, everybody's going to come in to therapy. They're face to face with another human being. So we're all going to come in using some of those masks and showing them and filtering things and noticing that we do that and how we do that and why, and putting on the kind of performance, the charm, which works very well in lots of environments. But hopefully over time, all those other parts can be welcomed, all those other parts come into the room, and then we can look at all of it, and somebody will realize, and that's been hopefully therapists' experience of therapy as well, that to show all of ourselves, it actually in lots of ways makes life even better for all of us to be seen and heard within, again, that environment. It can be a profoundly life-changing experience for people. And just wanted to tag on, as I say, I think it's only going to become more and more significant and more important as AI comes more and more to the fore. Again, looking at other videos, I have done a video on where I think AI is going to be and the great things about it and the problems with it. So I'm not going to talk much now about that. I will put a link to the video here so you can have a look at that. AI is amazing in lots of ways. I'm so glad from the point of view of the intelligence and the extent to which it can really soothe and look like or feel like it's empathizing and support people. I think it's amazing that we all have that at the touch of a button for us. But ultimately, people's well-being and happiness in life is based on their relationship with themselves and their relationship with others. And that's what we come to therapy for often, is to look at both of those things. It's only with another human being, it's only by being real and authentic that things will change. And as I say, I think face-to-face therapy, even online therapy, is one of those unique places in life where it's valued to be real. Radical honesty is valued, prioritized. The next one, always learning. This constant learning is something very much I love about it in a number of different ways. The first one would be with continuing professional development. There is endless amounts of things to look at, to read. Now with all the media we have, books, audio books, podcasts, there's continuing professional development face-to-face, online, all over the world, therapists all over the world. And it's of course not just therapists. We learn about things psychologically from all human beings generally. So it's something that we can constantly learn, that it's pretty much unlimited with the billions of people there are in the world about the things that we can learn. We can go back to old spiritual texts. We can go forward to what AI is going to be doing. That is very much the challenge of that, the growth that can come with that, the constant kind of stimulation that can come with it, and feeling of aliveness is really something that I very much love about being a therapist. Just to say here, when I was training, of course, there were things that I was learning on the training, which may be the case with you. I don't know. Let me know about that. But, 70% I found interesting and stimulating. The rest of it, I wasn't really that sure about. But afterwards, when you qualify, and of course, whilst you're training as well, you can very much focus on those things that you do find the most interesting. So I think that's great. The fact that it stimulates intellectually, that you can pursue those things that you find most interesting in the world. I would also say, of course, with clients, it's a wonderful thing to be sitting with these fascinating, amazing people, telling stories all the time, telling stories about what it's like to be their gender, the race, their sexuality, what it's like to be their age. 18 in my case, only see adults, to 85-year-olds. What's that experience like? What's old age like? What's it like being a late teenager, going through bereavements, diagnosed with terminal illness, infertility, secondary infertility, diagnosed with ADHD or autism, breakups, falling in love, having babies. You get people telling you these fascinating stories all the time. A number of the stories that would be the most interesting stories I know would probably have come from clients. Of course, I can't repeat them because they're confidential. But in terms of that human experience, human interest, it's hugely increased my trust in and awe of human beings to sit with them as their therapist. And of course, coming back, we learn a huge amount about ourselves and continue to learn a huge amount about ourselves over the years. I think being people's therapists as well, what are the kind of triggers with us? Who do we more immediately connect with than others? Why might that be? What are the qualities we like and admire in other people? What might we struggle with more? If this is very immediately present, which it can be with some people, and that feels like something in the body, that's how I notice, and the sort of intellect, that sort of flow is there much more immediately with some people than others. We're learning that about ourselves. Who is it that this is much more present with, and why, for example, is a very interesting thing to know. Of course, with psychography of clients and choosing the people that we will work with, but also in life generally. How have we made decisions in the past about who we spend time with? Sometimes we might not have much of a choice in terms of our work, or certainly at school, those sorts of things, much less choice. Well, now we do have choice. So how do we make those decisions? So yes, the constant learning, never stop learning. The fourth one, very importantly, is feeling part of a real community. I would always have had lots of people around me, but something I've learned through the years since being a therapist, there is that quote, loneliness isn't about not being around other people, it's about not being able to talk about the things that are important to you. And that's really stuck with me. And I can see that, as I say, there can be situations where you're surrounded by people, or I'm surrounded by people, but if I'm not able to talk about the things that are important to me at that moment, or generally in life, I'll feel much more alone. And that has changed profoundly with therapy, which makes me much more connected to other people generally, therefore much more connected to my external environment. And I just wanted to mention sort of three different ways in which that's happened, really. The first one, of course, being around other therapists. Of course, with other therapists, there are going to be people you want to spend more time with than others. But generally, there is a like-minded way of looking at the world and self. A curiosity about the kinds of things that I would be curious about and interested in generally. There's just a way of approaching other people, more often than not, that would be how I would want to be approached and how I would want to approach other people. So there's very much for me a situation of finding a place, finding home, finding somewhere amongst other therapists. Secondly, of course, clients. And this might sound like a strange thing because in terms of sharing of myself, of ourselves as therapists, self-disclosure, we have to look at that very much ethically. It's not the same situation, of course, as disclosing things within a group of other therapists, for example, certainly peer supervision, that kind of thing. But clients are there interested, if we're talking about a longer term relationship, interested in the kinds of things that I would be interested in, having a hope and belief in the power of relationships, in what can happen when two people come together, and what can be produced in that, and what can happen when you combine your emotional world and your intellect. Of course, clients can be, as therapists can at times, but one for in, one for out, or conflicted in that way. But certainly there is enough of common ground, enough of like-mindedness to really establish and maintain that sense of connection. So I would say very much I feel part of a community in some ways within my client practice. And then we might talk about new friends with therapists, other therapists, but something that interesting that has happened with people that I would have known for decades. When I would start to show more of self in terms of emotional experience, some relationships with some other people that I've known for years will significantly change, because that's something that's also important to them and been important to them. It's just that it wasn't shared before. It just wasn't present or offered in relationships. So that's been another way that even an existing community has changed. Relationships will have deepened. And as I say, to the extent that this may not be present with friendships, sometimes with family relationships, and it may never be, then you make a decision. I've made decisions, of course, as to what part or otherwise those will play in my life. But community, hugely important thing, very, very valuable for all kinds of reasons. And certainly, as I said, I very much feel part of something, and very much part of the world, very much like I've found my place, which I love. And then finally, fifth point, the first ones I've been talking about, 1 to 4, will be the kind of things, as I said, use the word love a lot. But I did also want to say that the fifth point is I love the fact that I've avoided what might have happened if I continued to do what I was doing before. No, I talk about this loop. You might say a virtuous circle, not that it's a circle or a loop, it's a figure of 8. But where there's a virtuous circle or a positive feedback loop, when things are going against you, when intellect is divided or in conflict with things emotionally, then often emotions will stop you or slow you down or cause you problems, manifesting as depression, anxiety, addictive behaviour, whatever it might be. And rather than a virtuous circle there, of course, you get a vicious circle, and those things tend to tighten up over time. And something that I really love is that I've avoided what might have happened if I'd continued to do that. A couple of things to say there. I think there's a cumulative effect of doing something for a long time, and of splitting these two or having them two work in conflict with each other for a longer and longer period of time. You know, doing it for the first 2 years was much easier than doing it for the last 6 months, although it was pretty much exactly the same in terms of time commitment, for example, and the hours worked and what I've been doing on a day-to-day basis. It was very different doing it at the end than it was at the beginning. So that would just have continued, I think. I've said in other videos, there are lots of things that I was going towards as far as going towards therapy, but I was also coming away from something which was distressing and problematic. From emotional symptoms, you might say, this would have meant that I wouldn't have been or wasn't the husband, father, friend, son that I would have wanted to have been. I think that would have got worse. I think doing something like that for longer, that would have adversely affected, in terms of my values and what's important to me, all the relationships around me, with this cumulative effect of continuing to do it. And also, as I've got older, you know, now over 50, I noticed that lots of things in life do improve in some ways, but there are also ways in which it becomes more difficult. So physical illness becomes more common, bereavements become more common, diagnosis of illness, that kind of thing. There is often a lot to carry. I think if I was doing that job that I was doing, frustrated, annoyed, not getting much from my job, I would absolutely not have been able to be the dad that I wanted to be to my daughter. So changing direction has avoided living this kind of defensive life, which have had was having adverse effects on me, on relationships, and has meant that life is profoundly different in 100 different ways. As I say, I mean, this has already gone on for quite a long time. It could go on a lot longer. So I love that about it, being a therapist. As I say, a far more loved life, therefore it feels to me like a far more lived life. A life that I won't regret looking back on, but I didn't want to live a life, I suppose, in a way that people would need to make excuses for me and my behaviour. And although nothing is perfect and never will be, perfection is all in human beings' mind, I think that's far more of the case now. And I love that about it. So those are some thoughts. As ever, I said at the beginning, would love to hear what you think. Please do provide your comments below. Please let me know what you think about the video. I will, for balance, probably talk some more about challenges in the future as well. I certainly will be talking about the kind of things that I do think about, how I might navigate things, choices that I make in order to maintain enjoying the profession in the way that I do. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. You take care, and I shall see you again soon.